Good afternoon and welcome to Cold Chain Insights, the podcast that focuses everything temperature controlled logistics of the pharmaceutical industry. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Lantos Pin, who is the co-founder of Logixity. And prior to that was the head of supply chain strategy for Deloitte. Lantos, welcome.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you for inviting me to the podcast.
Okay, just to kick things off, if you can give us a brief background about your career so far, and then a little bit about your role currently there at Logixity would be great.
I'm Lantos Pin. I'm a supply chain consultant by trade, focused on strategy and transformation. So really bringing a strategy to life and executing the work. I started my professional career over 10 years ago with Deloitte Consulting based in the Netherlands. And I was fortunate there to split my time in both working for the for-profit sector and helping the high-tech industry, express delivery and shipping companies and e-commerce entities to improve their supply chain, but also in the other part of my time helping the public sector to improve their supply chain, especially focused on improving access to pharmaceutical products, and worked with the Dutch public health sector, was part of the COVID response team there, but also with international donors like the Global Fund, the Gates Foundation, and worked with United Nations agencies to improve what we call health and humanitarian sectors, and had the opportunity to work across the African continent in my career. So I've been on the ground in Cameroon and Chad and Zimbabwe, for example, to see a lot about how pharmaceutical logistics is taking place there, what challenges there are across the continent, and how we could help. Then 3 years ago, I became an independent. I was approached by someone from the Gates Foundation to help her manage and execute her supply chain portfolio of investments, and helping her basically improving how donors shape their supply chain investments in African countries, and how we can also take away market barriers for the private sector and the for-profit sector, to allow them to grow and overcome barriers that they're facing, for instance, in accessing affordable working capital. In transitioning for myself, it opened my eyes, and I could see my past project experience with Deloitte suddenly as business opportunities. So I met with a couple of other persons to talk ideas I had, and then I met the current co-founder of Logixity, Richard, and we both sparked an interest on the topic, and together we decided to fund Logixity last year with the aim to improve logistics relationships and make it easier for both buyers and providers to find each other and start to collaborate.
Okay. I'm quite interested in that origin story, because obviously you spent 10 years in consulting in Deloitte, in a large corporation. And as you say, you've got huge amounts of experience around some quite interesting parts of the world like Africa and some difficult places to reach. What was the moment that convinced you to found Logixity, and what was the logistics problems that you saw coming up time and time again that you really wanted to fix by founding the business?
It's a challenge I saw across both the public and the private sectors, actually. And the moment that I really sort of took it to heart was when I was executing a project in Cameroon, where we had to identify logistic service providers. And we had a 5-person team calling around the country, visiting potential providers to ultimately identify 60 providers active in the country, and shortlisting 10 that we could potentially approach. And at that time, I realized, like, why is it so resource intensive to find them, right? And to engage them. So, and we want to take away that resource intensity behind it, right? And give providers also a structural way to showcase their business, their capabilities, to make it easier for potential buyers to access their services and to connect and start to collaborate. So that's one. I think another perspective that I saw over and over again in my experience was that when you are actually in the sourcing process itself, there are almost too many differences in expectations between buyers and providers, predominantly during the sourcing stage, but they don't always align with the reality when the operation starts a couple of months later. And at the same time, you see a high lock-in for buyers. You don't outsource your logistics every day. It's a huge investment in terms of cost, resources. So you want to do it well, right? And ultimately, again, if I take it back to the African emerging markets where I'm happily focused on, I want to be able to contribute to creating healthy logistics markets across the continent, right? And overcoming cross-country trade barriers. And all of this, I mean, with the Logixity platform currently, have really focused at sort of provider discovery, but it's an incremental and first step, I think, in making
Mm.
sure that we can create better engagement between buyers and providers.
So if you take Africa as an example, what's the current process for sourcing in Africa around supply chain? Someone who hasn't been there before, just paint us a picture of how it currently works.
Yeah, you will see across the African continent, from country to country and from entity to entity, that it really differs. If I, for instance, take the governments, who are the public sector supply chain is really dominant in a lot of African countries. Some of those countries don't have the institutional manpower or the skills or the expertise to outsource it, as the dominant
Hmm.
thought over the past decades was that the public sector should just execute the operations as well. If you are then suddenly sort of confronted or asked to outsource your logistics, it requires a different muscle that you need to learn how to flex, right? And so you see that in terms of the maturity, that's less. If you go towards countries that are already more accustomed in working with the private sector, know how to engage them, and you see
Hmm.
really sort of formal but typically quite lengthy procurement procedures as you're dealing with governments, right?
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
if you segue into the private for-profit sector, that's more dynamic, and especially at the larger corporations who are accustomed in working with distributors, with logistics service providers, you would see similar processes as we would see across the European or the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah. Okay. And so my understanding is Logixity is a SaaS platform. And could you give us a sort of simple tour in terms of how it operates and how it solves that problem you've just described?
Yeah, so at the moment it's very straightforward, in the sense that the two key things that we seek to address now is making sure that we can actually find providers, and then the second step is to start the sourcing process. So
Hmm.
if you would log in into our platform after registering your company, again taking the perspective of a buyer, you would fill in your company details and you would be able to access our provider discovery. See it as a glorified phone book, but then with a
Hmm.
lot of details in terms of the logistics service providers out there who can outline. It's a self-service platform, so providers are expected to register their
Hmm.
profile themselves, but they can outline their services, their capabilities, their digital solutions that they offer, the geographies that they can serve, what infrastructure and assets they deploy, and if there are any cold chain rooms, for instance, in the warehouses that they deploy. So a buyer is able to read it and to really sort of then pinpoint to say, hey, this is a potential provider I want to consider for my tender. Then once you've completed that market scan on our platform, you can make your way into sending a sourcing request, which you can
Hmm.
essentially do in two ways. You can facilitate it through our platform, or in case of larger companies who typically deploy their own procurement suites, you can just say, hey, let me publish the link to the Logixity platform to create more awareness amongst providers, to hopefully get more entities to bid on my
Hmm.
tender, and you just publish it there and you handle the rest of the sourcing process in your routine workflows.
Okay. And I think it's been running now for a year. You launched it roughly a year ago. What are the early customer stories or pilots provide you in terms of an insight into you're on the right track and you're solving sort of the right problem for people? Have you got any sort of use cases you could share?
So there are a couple of use cases. First of all, I want to say that we're very fortunate to have the backing of the Global Fund, a Geneva-based entity who commits itself to end AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria as epidemics. And a huge part of their supply chain investments into African countries, but also across other Asian continent and Latin America, is supply chain focused, right? And making sure that we are building the right capacity and infrastructure on the continent in order to make sure that those pharmaceutical products get out to the patients or the people in need.
Hmm.
So that helped us a lot and was a first proof point that the platform is definitely worth its value, because from Global Fund perspective, they have over the years, and I was part of that project for Cameroon, but they did it in other countries as well, is that they had set out on costly endeavors to make sure that we actually get some insights into the market. Well, and
Hmm.
now we digitize that, it becomes easier for them to manage it. And a second use case is a logistics integrator, 4PL entity in Nigeria, who's
Hmm.
actually working with us to promote Logixity platform across Nigeria at the moment, who have set out their sourcing requests on our platform as well. We are learning from that, improving the platform on an ongoing basis, as we really take a sort of lean startup methodology to heart. One of the key learnings that I saw over the past months was, and now we really get users to use the platform. And it's interesting to learn that you can develop a platform based on your own expertise, and in talking
Hmm.
with subject matter experts that we've engaged in the development of the platform. But the moment actual users start to use it, you see where things might go wrong, right? Or
Hmm.
how a certain user thinks he can use the platform, but he actually doesn't. And a key learning that we were seeing, I think, which is a key difference to at least my experience in the Netherlands and across Europe, is the digital savviness across the continent.
Hmm.
And just to bring that to life, we had a provider reaching out to us saying, can you please provide me with an Excel file with all the data fields I need to fill in for my
Hmm.
company profile, so I can do it on Excel and then copy and paste it in the platform. And then my whole response is, we want to digitize this. So we want to step away from that Excel-based list making, etc., and just have you do it online, save it, and you can continue whenever you prefer to continue again, and make it easier. And if there's a change, you can just do it yourself and maintain your profile.
Yeah. Okay. And what's the biggest time saving Logixity eliminates in terms of email threads, or you mentioned spreadsheets or bid normalization? And where is the biggest sort of saving that clients can get?
Yeah, at the moment, it's really sort of stepping away from the email threads, and no longer needing to set out a lot of phone calls, different emails, documents floating back and forth, because our platform really sort of integrates that into one process. And
Hmm.
so the platform allows you to publish your sourcing request. The providers that are directly invited get the invitation. They can submit any clarifying questions that they have through the platform, and also their bids. And the buyer is able to see that all the aggregate responses, and when the deadline is completed, they can do their evaluation and report back to the providers and award the work or not if they decide so. So that's really where the focus is now. I can imagine, as we seek to, again, based on user feedback we seek to expand basically the platform over the coming months, to not only stop when the sourcing process is over, but really also help with contracting, and more importantly, because that's in my experience where a lot of things go wrong, after the contract is signed and the operation starts, is to make sure that you actually can monitor and track contractual performance. And so we're thinking through how developments and what technical solutions we can develop there to make sure we help African providers, but also buyers, to improve the way that they can oversee and optimize their logistics relationships.
Yeah. Okay. And how does it integrate with existing systems like your ERP or TMS or quality platform? What is that transition like, or integration?
So at the moment, it's really a standalone marketplace offered. As mentioned, on sort of our thinking on expanding the functionality of the platform, integrations are definitely front and center, right? So a very tangible thing could be that at the end of a sourcing phase, I want the system to generate a rate card, and I want to be able to import that to my ERP system, right? We
Mhm.
could see other integrations for more the performance management part as well, over time. But as said, it's currently focused on as a standalone system, and we are exploring potential integrations.
And with the sourcing element of it, is there certain elements that you're focusing on, for example, like forwarder tenders or packaging or other things? Or do you see there's a sweet spot in terms of where the challenges or need in terms of sourcing in Africa is, or other regions?
Well, at the moment, we've set it up quite broadly to cater to most or all of the logistic services, not so
Hmm.
much on specific procurement of medicines for sorts or packaging. So it's really logistic services focused, but again, open to learning, right? And the more
Hmm.
users we start to onboard, and if there is a feedback, because we received the question you're asking a couple of times already, maybe we can expand it and add it in, right?
Hmm.
Another key element, for instance, front and center across African countries, is engaging digital providers to help them create end-to-end visibility, digitize their supply chain. So that's also something we're contemplating to add into the platform, to not only be able to find logistics service providers, but also supply chain technology providers.
Yeah. And are you partnering with a lot of the humanitarian relief organizations who we've spoken to actually on this podcast, a number of them, in terms of the work that they're doing in disaster areas, managing, things like Hurricane Melissa was one last year in the Caribbean, and other things. Does this platform fit in with their role as well, do you think?
So yes, it fits in. Actually, the platform under the engagement that we have with the Global Fund is sort of white labeled, and we call it the logistics marketplace, which is really sort of tailored to helping the health and the humanitarian sectors to engage with logistic service providers. The realistic situation also for humanitarian organizations is, and I listened to your interview with Marco, who was at MSF for a couple of years as well, is that their supply chain is typically so emerging, right? They need to
Mm.
respond so quickly to something that they deploy their own assets or they have pre-propositioned stock somewhere that they use. So it's not always as easy to sort of quickly then engage logistic service provider unless you set out sort of framework contracts that you can pull from, right? But we have various humanitarian organizations currently on the platform and hoping that we can grow the presence as we can see them, but also United Nations agencies being a core buyer group in the sector.
Yeah. And with if we to move on to sort of temperature control and pharma specifically, is there an element to the platform or benefit to the platform you see in terms of supporting that side of the sort of logistics network?
So yes, definitely. For providers specifically, they are able to showcase their cold chain capabilities. So
Hmm.
they can mention their services, but also specific for warehousing or their transportation assets. They can add in what assets that they have, what cold rooms, what refrigerated trucks or vans that they deploy. And
Hmm.
then it also allows buyers directly to sort of assess and make it easier for them to also find and engage those providers as they are more scarce across the African continent and they have their own challenges that they
Hmm.
face. But again, creating that visibility into the market, into what potential providers are out there, strongly believe that that's the first step in seeking to engage them. And I think with engagement and getting them on contract, improvements will follow and it helps them to sort of scale, hopefully, their business and expand the infrastructure to give way to more sizable cold chain providers across the continent.
Yeah. How do you rank the providers themselves in terms of their suitability for the customer? If they're looking to, for example, source packaging, how does that work on the platform so they can find the right type of packaging for the solution that they need?
Yeah, so the platform currently has a matching algorithm in there. So as a buyer sort of shares their tender documents, they are inputting what countries or what regions they are looking for services, what logistic services they are looking for. Based on all the inputs that providers give, can match potential providers. Again, as with any matching algorithm and with any marketplace, the more people on there and the more entities on there, the better we can do the matching. But that platform, that algorithm is in there. And that allows us to, again, if the platform is just live for 6 months now, but over time, as we seek to advance that algorithm, the more it learns, the better it matches, and we can take in the feedback from the matches that he had made previously. We expect that it becomes
Yeah.
very interesting to get really decent recommendations from logistic service providers based on what a buyer seeks to seek.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems in the space in general is just so many options available, and
Yep.
if you and it's time as you're trying to solve the problem. I can see it. There's time, and there's just such a complex offer out there of various providers all offering or shouting about the same sort of service. So, sort of fine tuning it so you can pinpoint the one that really solves the problem or fits within the budget or whatever it is. I can see being quite a big problem to solve for you, but if you can, I can see the huge benefit to it. And I'm surprised that's also not a benefit for the, say, European market or US market, not just, for example, the emerging ones as well.
Well, again, I'm reflecting on sort of my experience, and I'm curious about yours as well. But
Mm.
if I look, for instance, in the Netherlands, we're a small country, right? You have 100-ish sizable logistic service providers out here.
Mm.
People know them. So if you have a tender, directly know who to engage for it.
Mm.
So if the European market or the US market could definitely be interesting, but I think not so much for the sourcing process as providers are known, the larger companies have their own procurement suites, they have their own procurement teams.
Mhm.
That's sorted. I think where the platform could add value is in the updates that we seek to develop over the coming months, where we help companies to say, hey, we now actually have a contract. Let's start operations and
Mhm.
let's make it easier to manage that contract and to make sure that we build transparency into performance, into any issues or risks that occur during our operations as part of building, maturing, and growing your relationship that you have together.
Yeah, I think that, if you take, for example, the European market and you're looking to ship product out of the Netherlands, then there is an element of which forwarder to use, because obviously you've got the sort of white glove service who specialize in pharma and have a certain service and you pay a premium for that, or there's a more general service. And some forwarders are obviously bringing in cold corridors as well, and some are not. And it's sort of an emerging thing where if there's very strong cold corridors on certain lanes, that's not going to be readily available information for many people. But if it's sort of broken down in a platform, I can imagine that would be quite useful. And obviously people like to deal with the very large providers, but then the smaller ones. And if you look at packaging, that's where it gets very complicated. And certainly around things like IoT or data monitors or remote temperature controlled loggers, because again, you're in there of a sea of providers and actually trying to find the ones that maybe have local supply or offer reuse or rental, maybe duration or performance you're looking for.
Definitely.
I mean, it goes on, doesn't it? And that's the problem I presume most procurement teams are constantly trying to solve, who to work with.
Yeah, fully agreed with everything. And what you see, there are a couple of responses there, right? So first of all, across the African continent, you see that not everyone who is, and again, taking that the government or the public sector approach, not everyone is that familiar with what the specific logistic services are, right? And what one temperature logger versus another IoT sensor can achieve and what the benefits are. So you really need a bit of expertise in order to guide you through it. And that could be something where we can expand our value as a platform, or maybe as an add-on service in the future, or again in part of sort of managing that contract. You now have various providers of loggers, but they typically deploy their own platform solution, right? And it's not integrated with the rest. Is there maybe an opportunity to make sure that across the providers that you're deploying in your country, let's say as a government, maybe your platform can play a role in harmonizing the data, and regardless of whatever technology or sensor is used, we are able to track the end-to-end supply chain across the network that we have in our country. And I think specifically for the African sector and looking into the possibilities and the technical specs of sensors over the past months as well, duration is quite a thing, and not everywhere in Africa you have decent cellular connection. So that's also a key thing to consider when shipping products across the continent. And you want the logger that can help do that.
Yeah, and I think infrastructure on the ground as well. If as a client that everyone says they have a site in every part of the globe, but actually, what do they have on the ground? What is their network like? For example, locally, especially I presume in Africa, having a strong network there that you can trust and rely with good infrastructure, good temperature controlled storage, etc. Having that visibility before you go into tender is massively important. So
yeah, agreed. And I see ample opportunities to, if I look at the platform currently, we're trying to build it from the ground up in that sense, based on our logistics expertise. But if you segue into the future direction of it, the more information we get from providers, the more valuable it becomes, right? When you have a handle for what is the capacity in a country, or what are specific shipping lines where there's a lot of capacity available, that can all help you inform your tenders or achieve any of the goals you might have in terms of specific lanes that you seek to outsource within a tender.
yeah. No, absolutely. And if I'm a new client sort of looking at this or want to sort of bring it on, what is that onboarding process like in your experience? How complex is it? Because I know for a lot of teams that is always a massive fear in terms of bringing in new technology, etc. So what, in your experience, is it like, and what should they expect?
Yeah, so the whole platform is set up from really a proper UX and UI perspective. So we try to really make it as minimalist as possible. But at the same time, we are a marketplace, and we want to make sure that the providers and the buyers that are active on our marketplace also are credible. And so in deploying the onboarding process for the platform, we've designed 3 key steps. And so we expect a user to first sign up and verify their accounts, know how to reach them. Then they can select the role that they want to adopt on the platform, being either a buyer or provider, or we also offer dual accounts for freight forwarders or for PL companies. And then The most difficult step is for them the third step, where they actually need to register a company and they need to provide a lot of details in terms of their general contact information, a company description. They need to insert the industry or the industries that they are willing to serve, and they need to provide a bit of business credentials in terms
Hmm.
of their Chamber of Commerce registration or equivalent, the tax ID or VAT IDs or equivalent. And again, we know that we're asking for a lot of information, but we also find it important as a platform to be able to do a know your business process, to
Hmm.
test that credibility and to ensure that the providers on our platform are worthy of joining and doing business with.
How do you do that with when you're sort of looking at providers? What's the process? I mean, you've talked about obviously that they're sort of getting their credentials, but how do you sort of vet them, as it were?
So it begins after they have signed up, and then we can basically use that information to test externally with third parties, and to vet them. Checking their website, we plan to call them. We want to test them in external databases, all to an extent where we say, hey, we're comfortable to give them a label on the platform saying that they've been verified by the Logixity team.
Hmm.
And then this is again just the general company information, right? After that, we still know nothing about their footprint, their specific capabilities, their digital offerings, etc.
Hmm.
All of that is optional, and they can provide it once they got access to the platform. So when they've completed their registration, they get access to the platform, and we can do that know your business process in the backend. And then they can, in the meantime, they can make full use of the platform. Plus, they are able to complete their profile and outline their service offerings, the digital capabilities, their footprint on their own terms, whenever they
Right.
have time for it, right? So it's not required directly upfront to confuse them with like, oh, we have an hour worth of information to populate before you can even use the platform.
Okay. Oh, good. So moving away from the specific platform, but more about your sort of industry knowledge and your experience. You've got obviously a long career. Where, because obviously you're focusing on tenders, where do tenders typically go wrong in your experience? Where are the times when they fall down most commonly?
Differs again per different entity that you're looking at, right? Again, taking sort of the public health sector as a core focus of mine, you see that a tender could go wrong in the potential entity who's outsourcing it doesn't fully understand the complexity and the full sourcing process.
Mm-hmm.
That in turn can lead to lower quality tender documents or inclarities in the tender documents, risking further issues down the line when you have actually awarded the work and operations is starting. But I've also seen situations where it was beneficial for one or even both sides to not also be fully transparent as part of their tendering.
Mm.
That could be because they are not fully understanding the process or all the logistics or the cold chain complexities involved there. Or that providers are not fully transparent, so they can actually earn some extra money from the work that is not part of the contract, and they can do that at a nice hourly rate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think creating that transparency and making sure that there is a room for both providers and buyers to ask open questions during the tenders would help sort of mitigate a lot of those risks. But
Mm-hmm.
if you ask for a specific point where I see tenders potentially going wrong, is that fact that we're not very clear in sort of the mutual expectations we might have. And
Mm-hmm.
the tender documents typically say, I want you to execute a couple of logistic services and really focus on the technical details. Whereas in our sector, there's a lot of organizations looking with the execution of your health supply chain in a specific country. It's not only the government, it are state level actors, other government entities, but also international donors, technical consultants. So a lot of their work is also socializing and
Mm-hmm.
making
Mm-hmm.
sure you engage and coordinate the large stakeholder field. And those things don't always end up in the tenders, so they're not budgeted.
Mm-hmm.
But then there is an expectation when the work is won that a logistic provider needs to do all that work.
Right.
And that could risk, obviously, their resourcing, but also, and the last point I'm seeing more or often in tenders is that they are not specific in outlining specific accountabilities within the process. So, what are handovers between actors? How do we
Mm-hmm.
verify that the product was still compliant at the moment of handover? And do we check temperature sensors, for example? And that accountability in those handovers, when not clearly defined, it could risk potential collaboration, again, not specific to the tender phase, but a risk I could see that if it's not properly reflected in the tender, it could jeopardize your operational go live.
Yeah. And so if you're tendering in supply chain or logistics, say for pharmaceuticals, who are the stakeholders in your experience that should be engaged and sort of brought in, as you say, to have their opinions heard and brought into the offer?
Yeah, you have a various field of experts that you want to let weigh in, right? Obviously, first and foremost, it's the procurement expert, those who know within the government or within an organization how the approvals go, what the budget is, etc. They can help you define the tender documents, the bid sheets, etc. But then fairly soon, you ideally also want to engage a logistics expert, right? Making sure that you have that basic knowledge to actually write a quality tender documents, that all the requirements are very clear before you send it out. And a third person I would want to engage, but you don't see that happen that often, is a quality manager who also can look more at sort of not only the quality of the provider, but the quality of the process, other related fields, to make sure that you really become compliant to pharmaceutical regulations in the country or across the countries.
Yeah. Okay, good. I know we're sort of getting a little bit short on time, so I just wanted to get your views on the future outlook as well, and where you want to take Logixity in the next, say, 3 to 5 years. If we sit down maybe in 3 years' time, where do you want the platform to be, and how do you want it to look?
Yeah, great question. We have so many opportunities to where we can go, right? When we started making the platform, we thought we were in quite a niche, but actually when we sort of now deep dive in that niche and we get user feedback from across the African continent, we see that we can still go in a lot of directions, right? So we're currently weighing them, but a key belief that we have is that after matching buyers and providers, executing the sourcing process, I think the true value of the platform would lie in making sure that you can properly govern and coordinate and collaborate during the contract lifecycle, and that our platform can help create the transparency in terms of your performance, in terms of the cost incurred and other issues or extra work that you are defining, and how you can then sort of jointly get to an expectation that it's not a transactional relationship anymore, but more strategic or collaboration based around together optimizing your supply chain or the network that you see in the country. And I think that's where our platform can help play a role.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, good. If people want to get in contact with you or learn more about this, what's the best way of doing that?
Well, they can connect on LinkedIn. Happy to have a conversation. They can also use the platform. The best way to access it now is on logisticsmarketplace.health, where people can see the white labeled version. They are able to use it, and they will find our contact information there as well. So happy to reach out.
Any events? You going to any events this year that you'll be attending, or they can meet you there?
We are contemplating a couple of events at the moment. CEPIX in South Africa being a prominent one, potentially a couple in Nigeria, specific industry sectors, for instance, for oil and gas or others. Or later down the year, we have events in our sector, like the Global Health Supply Chain Summit, that we are probably attending. So there are ample opportunities to connect. But again, also happy to connect one-on-one on LinkedIn or through email.
Great. Good. Well, listen, really appreciate you coming on and taking the time. It's fascinating to understand about things like this, new bits of technology coming out. You've got a tremendous sort of history in the space, and it's a really interesting project that you're working on, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the next couple of years, because if you could solve this problem, it would be obviously a big win for the whole industry. So, I applaud you and good luck.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your time in the conversation.
Good. Nice meeting you as well. So you've been listening to Cold Chain Insights. My name's Thomas Hunt. Please tune in next week for our next guest. We'll see you then.